Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower and the seed. Once again, an immense crowd gathered around him on the beach as he was teaching. So he got into a boat and sat down and talked from there. His usual method of teaching was to tell the people stories, or parables. One of them went like this. Listen, a farmer decided to sow some grain. As he scattered it across his field, some of it fell on a path, and the birds came and picked it off the hard ground and ate it. Some fell on thin soil with underlying rock. It grew up quickly enough, but soon wilted beneath the hot sun and died because the roots had no nourishment in the shallow soil. Other seeds fell among thorns that shot up and crowded the young plants so that they produced no grain. But some of the seeds fell onto good soil and yielded 30 times as much as he had planted, some of it even 60 or 100 times as much. If you have ears, listen. Afterwards, when he was alone with the 12 and with his other disciples, they asked him, "What does your story mean?" He replied, "You are permitted to know some truths about the kingdom of God that are hidden to those outside the kingdom. Though they see and hear, they will not understand or turn to God or be forgiven for their sins. But if you can't understand this simple illustration, what will you do about all the others I'm going to tell? The farmer I talked about is anyone who brings God's message to others, trying to plant good seed within their lives. The hard pathway where some of the seed fell represents the hard hearts of some of those who hear God's message. Satan comes at once to try to make them forget it. The rocky soil represents the hearts of those who hear the message with joy, but like young plants in such soil, their roots don't even go very deep. And though at first they get along fine, as soon as persecution begins, they wilt. The thorny ground represents the hearts of people who listen to the good news and receive it. But all too quickly the attractions of this world and the delights of wealth and the search for success and the lure of nice things come and crowd out God's message from their hearts, so that no crop is produced. But the good soil represents the hearts of those who truly accept God's message and produce a plentiful harvest for God, 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as was planted in their hearts. Then he asked them, "When someone lights a lamp, does he put a box over it to shut out the light? Of course not. That light couldn't be seen or used. A lamp is placed on the stand to shine and be useful. All that is now hidden will someday come to light. If you have ears, listen. And be sure to put into practice what you hear. The more you do this, the more you will understand what I tell you. To him who has been given, from him who has not, shall be taken away even what he has." Here is another story illustrating what the kingdom of God is like. A farmer sowed his field and went away, and as the days went by, the seeds grew and grew without his help, for the soil made the seeds grow. First a leaf blade pushed through, and later the wheat heads formed, and finally the grain ripened. And then the farmer came at once with his sickle and harvested it. Jesus asks, "How can I describe the kingdom of God? What story shall I use to illustrate it?" It is like a tiny mustard seed. Though this is one of the smallest seeds, yet it grows to become one of the largest of plants, with long branches where birds can build their nests and be sheltered. He used many illustrations to teach the people as much as they were ready to understand. In fact, he taught only by illustrations in his public teachings, but afterwards, when he was alone with his disciples, he would explain his meaning to them. As evening fell, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took him just as he was and started out, leaving the crowds behind. But soon a terrible storm arose. High waves began to break into the boat, until it was nearly full of water and about to sink. Jesus was asleep at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. Frantically, they waked him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you even care that we are all about to drown?" Then he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Quiet down." And the wind fell, and there was a great calm. And he asked them, "Why were you so fearful? Don't you even yet have confidence in me?" And they were filled with awe and said amongst themselves, "Who is this man that even the winds and the seas obey him?" Chapter 5. Jesus casts out demons. When they arrived at the other side of the lake, a demon-possessed man ran out from a graveyard just as Jesus was climbing from the boat. This man lived among the gravestones and had such strength that whenever he was put into handcuffs and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the handcuffs from his wrists and smashed the shackles and walked away. No one was strong enough to control him. All day long and through the night he would wander among the tombs and in the wild hills, screaming and cutting himself with sharp pieces of stone. When Jesus was still far out on the water, the man had seen him and had run to meet him and fell down before him. Then Jesus spoke to the demon within the man and said, "Come out, you evil spirit." It gave a terrible scream, shrieking, "What are you going to do to me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? For God's sake, don't torture me." "What is your name?" Jesus asked. And the demon replied, "Legion, for there are many of us here within this man." Then the demons begged him again and again not to send them to some distant land. Now as it happened, there was a huge herd of hogs rooting around in the hill above the lake. "Send us into those hogs," the demon begged, and Jesus gave them permission. Then the evil spirits came out of the man and entered the hogs, and the entire herd plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned. The herdsmen fled to the nearby towns and countryside, spreading the news as they rang. Everyone rushed out to see this for themselves, and a large crowd soon gathered where Jesus was. But as they saw the man sitting there, fully clothed and perfectly sane, they were frightened. Those who saw what had happened were telling everyone about it, and the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. So he got back into the boat. The man who had been possessed by the demons begged Jesus to let him go along, but Jesus said no. "Go home to your friends," he told him, "and tell them what wonderful things God has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region and began to tell everyone about the great things Jesus had done for him, and they were awestruck by his story. When Jesus had gone across by boat to the other side of the lake, a vast crowd gathered around him on the shore. The leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, came and fell down before him, pleading with him to heal his daughter. "She is at the point of death," he said in desperation. "Please come and place your hands on her and make her live." Jesus went with him, and the crowd thronged behind. In the crowd was a woman who had been sick for 12 years with a hemorrhage. She had suffered much from many doctors through the years and had become poor from paying them, and she was no better. In fact, she was worse. She had heard all about the wonderful miracles Jesus did, and that is why she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his clothes. "For," she thought to herself, "if I can just touch his clothing, I will be healed." And sure enough, as soon as she had touched him, the bleeding stopped, and she knew she was well. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out of him, so he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "All this crowd pressing around you, and you ask who touched you?" But he kept on looking around to see who it was who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, healed of your disease." Jesus raises a dead girl. While he was still talking to her, messengers arrived from Jairus' home and the news that it was too late. His daughter was dead and there was no point in Jesus coming now. But Jesus ignored their comments and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just trust me." Then Jesus halted the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go on with him to Jairus' home except Peter, James, and John. When they arrived, Jesus saw that all was in a great confusion with unrestrained weeping and wailing. He went inside and spoke to the people. "Why all this weeping and commotion?" he asked. "The child isn't dead, she's only asleep." They laughed at him in bitter derision, and he told them all to leave. And taking the little girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples, he went into the room where she was lying. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Get up, little girl." She was 12 years old, and she jumped up and walked around. Her parents just couldn't get over it. Jesus instructed them very earnestly not to tell what had happened, and told them to give her something to eat.